Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today is part 2 of my awards videos. This video will cover my 7th Man of the Year award, my Best Mid-Season Edition award, and my Comeback Player of the Year awards. All three of these awards are original awards. These are not ones that the Overwatch League does. They're ones that are not completely my idea. They're ones that are inspired by a number of other things. Tweets that I've seen, as well as awards in other leagues as well. So these are not necessarily all just my creations, but these are ones that I have seen from other places and ones that I've created on my own. Best Mid-Season Edition isn't one that I see a lot of people talk about, so I wanted to highlight that. As always, once again, this is my opinion. The format for this video will obviously be a little bit different from my Roll Stars. Then there were 4 for each award, plus the 4 honorable mentions. Here, there is just going to be 5 nominees that I will name, give a brief little reasoning why they're nominated, and then I will announce who I picked, and I will give you my full reasoning for why I picked that player for the award. I wanted to do these 3 awards in particular because I felt that they were awards that not only highlight strong play, but also highlight strong organizational management. If you're an organization that's able to find some of these diamonds in the rough in the middle of the season, or make a good trade in the middle of the season, or have a player on your bench from the beginning of the season who maybe don't play a lot, but when you do play them, they have a big impact, or you decide to make them the starter late in the season because you feel like you need to make a change, and that player has a huge impact, that's a sign of good scouting. And even if it's something that didn't happen early enough, it was a change that they waited too long to make, potentially, or a change that they felt like didn't need to be made at first and then change their mind. Whatever it does, it just reflects strong organizational scouting, at least in the beginning, to bring in these players who are sitting on the bench and whatnot, or to bring in these players that were in contenders or were on another team and weren't getting a ton of play time, or even a player who had been in the league the season prior, or even 2018 or whatever, and bringing them in or bringing them back and putting your faith in them because you see a lot of potential in them. I just thought these are kind of good awards. They work well together. They're all very similar, and I think that they emphasize stories as well as players who aren't necessarily going to be MVP candidates, but who deserve in their own right to be shouted out and praised for what they've done so far this season. So let's start with the first award, and that is the 7th Man of the Year award. Now, there is a bit of a kind of loose rule for this award. Essentially, in order to be considered for this award, you have to be a player who played less than 6 hours all season. Now, obviously, that's not a super set in stone rule. A player could have played a little bit more, and also depending on what team they were on and how much that team played, you're not going to necessarily see a ton of players there. And also, they have to be a player that was on their team from the start of the season. They had to have been a player that was on the roster from the very beginning. If they were added later on, they would be eligible for Best Mid-Season Edition, but not for 7th Player of the Year or 7th Man of the Year. Essentially, this is a player who didn't have a ton of playtime throughout the season, but in the playtime that they did have, they were very impactful. They had a huge impact on their team, and they were instrumental in success that that team found in the moments that they played, whether that be here and there throughout the season, or if it be one specific meta that they were super prominent in. That is what it means to be nominated for this award. So let's go over the nominees. Once again, I will be announcing these in alphabetical order, so that is the order that they will be set in, just to avoid any potential confusion. The first nominee is Bianca of the New York Excelsior. Of course, a young flex tank who had been with the XL2 Academy team prior to the season. Didn't start for most of the season, sat behind Hotba, but came in late in the season. First match was a win for New York against the Guangzhou Charge, in which Bianca looked very good. Since Bianca has joined, the team has looked a lot better and has had a huge impact for this team, and that is why he is nominated for this award. My second nominee is DM of the Shanghai Dragons. did not play nearly as much in 2020 as he did in 2019, but when he did play, he had a huge impact. He is still one of the best hit scan players in the league. He was a huge part of the success that this team found in the Summer Showdown. Though they didn't win the Summer Showdown, he was a huge part of their win in the semifinals, and he was a huge player in the loss to the Guangzhou Charge, really pressuring Happy and forcing the Guangzhou Charge to have to rely on Eileen to step up in big moments. Now, of course, Eileen did step up in big moments, but DM was a huge factor in allowing Shanghai to stay competitive in that series and in every match he's played. Prior to that and since then, he has still been a very solid player. Next is EQO of the Philadelphia Fusion. When Echo was first released, EQO was the Echo specialist for the Philadelphia Fusion, and he looked very good on the hero. He was one of the best Echoes in the league. When Genji became meta in the Summer Showdown and the lead up to the Summer Showdown, EQO was the Genji that the Fusion put their money in, and he performed incredibly well for this team. They fell just flat in the Summer Showdown, but EQO's Genji play was not the issue for them. Of course, his heroics on Rialto, on the final map of the series, to keep them alive, though it did not translate to a map win and ultimately a series win, he still had a huge impact when he did play for this Fusion roster in 2020. Next is Late Young for the CHENGDU Hunters. An interesting pick potentially, but CHENGDU struggled a lot this season. They did not find a ton of success early in the season, but in the Countdown Cup lead up, with the development of this CHENGDU meta, the CHENGDU Hunters put a lot of time and play style around Late Young Zarya play, and he did not disappoint. He was one of the most important pieces in getting CHENGDU to go undefeated in the lead up to the Countdown Cup and getting them their win in the quarterfinals of the Countdown Cup as well. He was very instrumental in their success in the CHENGDU meta, the meta that they developed, and I would expect him to be a big part of this team's plan going forward into the season playoffs. The final candidate for 7th Man of the Year is Luffy, also of the Shanghai Dragons, a player who was the only backup support that this Shanghai Dragons roster has, which means he played both flex support and main support at times, playing a decent amount of Mercy, as well as coming in at times to replace Izayaki if Izayaki was injured. He also came in to support Lee Jagan one time when he was injured. He substituted for him. So a lot of things coming out from Luffy. A lot of great play out of him. Very good and very important piece of this Shanghai Dragons backline whenever players were out, and that is why he is nominated for this award. But, of course, only one player can win this award, and the player that I am giving the award to is Bianca. And I know some people might say he shouldn't get this award because he is a starter now. He is the flex tank player that New York has put a ton of time into making sure he is the starter for this team. But the reason why I am giving him this award is because Bianca did not play that much this season. He only has about 3.5 hours of playtime this season, so he hasn't played a ton. But in the time since Bianca started playing, New York has looked more coordinated, they've looked more put together. Their only losses since Bianca has played, and in matches that Bianca plays in, are to the Shanghai Dragons and the Shanghai Dragons. They beat the Guangzhou Charge. Yes, they had that loss to the Seoul Dynasty back a couple weeks ago, but Bianca did not play in that series. Hotba was the player that they relied on, and they were running some weird compositions, and it didn't really seem like the team really knew what to do. But with Bianca in the lineup, New York has been very, very good. They have been way better with Bianca in the lineup than what they were with Hotba, and the level of improvement that Bianca has brought to this NYXL team in just the limited amount of appearances he's had was enough for me to give him this award. So Bianca is my 7th Man of the Year for 2020. The next award is the Best Mid-Season Addition. Now, this can go to any player that was added to a team during the season. After the season had begun, any player added was eligible for this award. So what that means is a player like Sparkle or Mandu, who were added to their teams before the season, but just didn't turn old enough to play until the season had already begun are not eligible because they were already on a team. But any player that was already 18 before the season started and then was added, or even a player like QOQ who was not eligible to play before the season started, but wasn't signed to a team until after the season had started, could be eligible for this award. But spoiler alert, he is not eligible. But let's go through the nominees and candidates for this award. Starting with Architect of the Hangzhou Spark. Of course, originally with the San Francisco Shock, signed back in 2018. He spent 2019 with them and then was traded during this 2020 season to the Hangzhou Spark. Architect has had a huge impact on this Hangzhou Spark roster. QOQ was obviously also a big addition, but QOQ was more of a we don't actually have a flex tank because Rhea is injured type of signing, but Rhea was actually having a season good enough, I think, to justify saying QOQ was kind of a we need him in the moment, but he's not necessarily a savior for our team. Architect was a must-get player for the Spark roster. They needed a new flex DPS player, and they came in big, bringing in Architect, who has been incredible so far for this team, has really helped them resurge late in the season when they had a very rough start to the season. Of course, they had a finals appearance in the Countdown Cup. Granted, their bracket path was pretty easy, and they did not look very good against Shanghai, but Architect has certainly been a huge piece to this Hangzhou Spark roster's second half success, and I wanted to give him a huge shout out for what he has done for the Spark roster. Second, I have Fielder of the Paris Eternal. First, we saw Hip retire, then we saw Gray retire. The Paris Eternal were in desperate need of a flex support, and they found quite possibly the steal of the season with Fielder. Now, was he the best? Only time will tell, but Fielder was incredible for this team. And playing on 200 ping, playing from South Korea, waking up in the early hours of the morning or middle of the night, whatever you want to say. Fielder came up big for this Paris Eternal team when they needed a flex support player, and it was a bit of a risky pickup, but Fielder was certainly one of the highlights in terms of players added during the season, and that is why he is a nominee for this award. Next is the International Man of Mystery, Kevster. No images exist of this man except for this lost image, this cursed image, this image that no one has ever wanted you to see, but it is here on your screens for you to look at. Kevster came into the LA Gladiators, flex DPS player, and this was a spot that the Gladiators had been struggling with most of the season. Mirror and Jaru did not really live up to the expectations or the potential that they had been or that had been anticipated they would. Mirror has had some very good moments here and there, and he certainly has some heroes that really fit him. But Kevster has been electric for this Gladiators team. He has been consistent since he joined this team. He has done nothing but help this Gladiators team to a very, very, very strong second half of the season. Certainly still with ups and downs, but Kevster playing, I'm pretty sure from Sweden, has been a huge, huge, huge benefit to this Gladiators team and has helped them become a much better team in the second half of the season. Next is a bit of an interesting one that a lot of people might disagree with a little bit. I have 2U of the Seoul Dynasty. Now, I know 2U is a relatively new player. He's only been with the Seoul Dynasty since the end of July, but there has been a marked improvement with this team since 2U has joined. He has been incredibly exceptional. I don't even know, that's not the word I want to use. He's been consistently good for the Seoul Dynasty team. He has brought consistent flex tank play, which had been the biggest weakness for this Seoul Dynasty roster up until this point all season. So much so that he was signed as a two-way player, and in the most recent roster announcement for the Gen G team, 2U wasn't even on the list because he has just been that good for the Seoul Dynasty team. They believe in him, they trust in him, they think that he is the flex support that they need for the future, and I think that he has proven a lot to the league, and he has really, really, really boosted this team and has been one of the most important pieces for this team, and I think that he is going to be the starter for the Seoul Dynasty, potentially for the long term. The final nominee is Twilight. Twilight has been incredible this season for the San Francisco Shock. Obviously, a player who was on the Vancouver Titans of 2019. In the fallout of that, he finds his way onto the San Francisco Shock, where he has been incredible. His on play in particular has been some of the best in the league. He was instrumental in the success of the San Francisco Shock in the Countdown Cup, and he was dominating against the Philadelphia Fusion. There is not enough words to describe how good Twilight is. He is one of the top flex sports in the league. He comes into an already stacked San Francisco Shock roster and has a major impact, making this team even better and making them serious contenders for the 2020 championship and the repeat of a title. But only one of those 5 can win this award, and I am going to give that award to Fielder. Now, you maybe could have told, based on how I hyped up Fielder, that I was going to give him the award, but it really is incredibly impressive what Fielder was able to do. A player who I personally had very little knowledge of before he joined this team, and a player who's incredible to look at just because of the fact that he was playing in Korea, 200 ping, and he was electric for this team. Before he joined this team, he played for GC Busan Wave, a somewhat known team. He had stopped playing for them back in March, late in March 31st. And I think there was just kind of a question of what they were going to do when Hip retired and when Gray retired, and they settle on Fielder, who has been playing all season from insanely high numbers of ping and has been consistent and has been making huge plays as well, which is something that you don't really expect to see from somebody who is 200 ping. But he has been consistently good for this team. And if you look at this team, really the time when this Paris Eternal roster really kind of started to perform at a super high level wasn't necessarily when Sparkle joined. It was kind of when Fielder joined. Now, yes, Sparkle comes back, or Sparkle becomes eligible, Xe comes back, and the team starts to look their best, and Fielder was a part of that. But Fielder has been an incredible player for this Paris Eternal roster, who has been incredibly undervalued and underappreciated all season. I gave him a shout out in my Roll Stars video, but I want to give him another shout out here today as a very good player, and the player who I believe was the best midseason addition for the 2020 season. The final award for today is my Comeback Player of the Year. This award goes to a player who had a down year in 2019, but bounced back in 2020, exceeded expectations, looked better than we had ever seen them potentially, and returned to form to prove that they are still one of the elite players in the Overwatch League. Let's start with the first one, which is, of course, Ben Best of the Paris Eternal. One of the worst main tanks, in my opinion, from back in 2019. One of the players who I really felt very underwhelmed by. This was a player who I looked at this team, and I looked at the main tanks they had going into this season. I was very worried about it. I was very worried about Ben Best and No Smite. I didn't think they were two incredibly exceptional players. I thought they were both very underwhelming back in 2019. I didn't expect a lot out of this tank line. And while I still think there's a lot of room for improvement from both Ben Best and No Smite, the play that came out of Ben Best from 2019 to 2020, the jump was incredible. Ben Best was so much better in 2020 than he was in 2019. His Reinhardt was insane, was one of the best in the league. He was very, very central to the success that this Paris Eternal team found in 2020, and I think that you have to look at him as a major comeback player in 2020, and that is why he is nominated for this award. My next Comeback Player of the Year nominee is Birdring of the LA Gladiators, a player who maybe I snubbed a little bit, not including in my honorable mentions at the least back in my Roll Stars video. Birdring has had an incredible season. I was a huge doubter of Birdring coming into the season. I did not think he'd find a ton of success. 2018, of course, he had his ups and his downs, but he came up when it really mattered in the season playoffs. But 2019, he did not have a great year. He really struggled. He was benched a decent amount here and there, and it really seemed like Birdring was kind of a washed player. There wasn't a lot of potential for him. It really seemed like a bad signing by the Gladiators, a signing that wouldn't really lead to much success. Birdring has been one of the most consistently dominant players for the Gladiators roster. He was insane in 2020, and you have to shout him out as one of the biggest comeback players for 2020. Next is Fearless of the Shanghai Dragons. What a story for this guy. Originally on the 2018 0-40 Shanghai Dragons, leaves the team at the start of the 2019 season due to personal health reasons, and spends some time in contenders before finally making his way back up to the Overwatch League in 2020 with not a ton of expectations, and he shattered all of them. He was super consistent for this team, one of the top tank players this season, and I think you have to look at Fearless as one of the great stories in Overwatch and the great stories in esports in general. That's definitely recently, potentially of all time. Next, I have Fleta. Now, this is a bit of an interesting one. Fleta, of course, has always been a super strong DPS player. He was one of the top DPS players in 2018. In 2019, he was still solid. He still got a lot of playtime in the Seoul Dynasty, but the fact that they'd shipped him out, they got profit, and they said, we don't need Fleta anymore, it seemed kind of like Fleta's time was over. It seemed like Fleta maybe was not going to be able to have this huge season. And you looked at the DPS players on the Shanghai Dragons roster. Ding was one of the top DPS players in 2019. DM, one of the best DPS players in 2019. You have Lip, this rising rookie, this incredibly talented rookie player. It didn't really seem like Fleta was going to have a major spot on this roster, and maybe if he did early in the season, he was going to lose that spot late in the season. But Fleta just continued to dominate. He continuously was a top DPS player all season. Obviously an MVP candidate, one of my 5 MVP finalists, as I had tweeted out a couple weeks ago now. And he is just so good. And he exceeded expectations. He is on one of the best teams in the league, and he is one of the most central pieces to the success of that Shanghai Dragons roster. Fleta, incredibly impressive this season after a somewhat down year in 2019. Good to see a return to form for the man who coined the deadlift. And my final nominee for Comeback Player of the Year is Sato. Sato, very interesting player. Had an okay year in 2018, though he only played a little bit of the year. He played the Stage 4 as well as the playoffs because he was suspended for the first 30 games of Season 1. 2019, he was one of the biggest criticisms of this Fusion roster. He really couldn't play Reinhardt at a super high level. A lot of people blamed him. A lot of people looked at him as one of the worst main tanks in the league. And at the beginning of this season, even I said, how is this Fusion roster planning on relying on arguably one of the weakest main tanks in the league as their only main tank on this roster? Sato had his best season in the Overwatch League yet. His Reinhardt looked much improved. His Winston still looks as strong as always. This is a player who proved to everybody that he was still one of the top main tanks in the league and still could be one of the top main tanks in the league. And he now stands as one of the best in the league. So, huge shout out to him and his play. But of course, only one player can get the award. And I am going to give it to quite possibly the most obvious award winner on this list. It's gotta go to Fearless. What Fearless was able to do, going from the 0-40 Dragons to being out of Overwatch on a somewhat middling contenders team playing in China. A player who people just kind of wrote off. People didn't really think he would ever make it back into the Overwatch League. It seemed like his time was over. Gamsu was brought in back in 2019 after Fearless left. A lot of people thought the Dragons would just re-sign him. They already had Stand 1 on the roster. Didn't really seem like a lot of opportunity for Fearless. He was announced just before the season started, so it really seemed like Fearless wasn't even going to be much of anything. He was just there as for some depth for the roster because they wanted to have that full 12-man roster. And Fearless was incredible. An incredible story, an incredible comeback for a player who was good in 2018, wasn't exceptional in 2018, but he never had the real opportunity to prove just how good he was playing on a team that was really, not good. The 2018 Dragons were. So incredible season for Fearless. One of the best stories of the season. And that is what gives him the Comeback Player of the Year award from me. So that is all the awards for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you disagree with my selections, if you agree with my selections, let me know down below. Monday will be the final 3 awards: Coach of the Year, Rookie of the Year, and MVP, so stay tuned for that. But for now, I am going to get out of here. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy, but I am going to get out of here. So, until next time, bye-bye.